Hello. So let's talk about a really awesome, very short, easy read, a wonderful little book that was an important part of my education when I was in college, learning how to analyze plays and learning how to read plays. It's called Backwards and Forwards, A Technical Manual for Reading Plays by David Ball, published in 1983. I think yeah, I don't think he's updated it. Actually, he still talks about it a lot. But anyway, it's a really great book for audience members to read, which is why you're watching this lecture either in Intro to Theater or it's also an excellent book for anybody who is doing theater, a playwright especially, but obviously a director and obviously actors too. So it's just an all-around great read. I have a copy of it. If you want to borrow it, I would be more than happy to have you read it. It's a very quick read, but since I already make you read so much stuff already, I thought I would give you a very quick down and dirty for the main points of this book, this awesome little blue book. Now, this you will see that if you're on one of my classes and we're going to talk about script analysis and other ways, a lot of this stuff is going to repeat itself because basically everybody that studies how to analyze plays agrees on a lot of things. They agree on a lot of things. And they primarily agree that all plays are made up of action. Things happen. This is often referred to as dramatic action. If something doesn't happen, then it's not a play. This is particularly how dramatic literature differentiates itself from other literature, such as fiction or poetry or what have you. I'm not going to particularly point out how exactly plays are different from other literature throughout this lecture or probably other lectures, but it's probably going to be pretty obvious. Now, so let's stick to David Ball's analysis. He says, and many people agree, that dramatic action is something happens and it causes something else to happen. You hit the cue ball and it hits another ball, and then that is the action. Just hitting the cue ball is not enough. It's got to cause something else to happen. Now, in plays, don't confuse the term action with physical activity. Me coming into the room and telling you something is an action. It's something that happens. However, it is important that we see it happen on stage. If I come on stage and I tell you that Billy just killed Kenny, minor South Park reference for those of you who caught it, then the action was me telling you that. It wasn't the murder. So anyway, sorry, my little, I'm probably getting the way some of my words here, but according to Ball, action occurs when something happens that makes or permits something else to happen. Kind of clear. Ball takes it a step further. I don't want you to get too very much caught up in the nuts and bolts of his terms. More important that you understand the basic concepts, because those are what's important. But according to David Ball, an action requires two events. Two things happen, and the two of those together is called an action. Now I'm going to go ahead and flip down to this slide that I wrote. I was trying to think of a play, a story, or whatever that I could use as an example, and it's impossible. Every time I try to do that in class, nobody has seen the same movies, nobody has read the same plays. David Ball uses Hamlet as his example, and incidentally, if you are ever involved in any production of Hamlet as an actor or director or audience member, whatever, you must read his book, because he completely his argument is so simple but brilliant. So if you're involved in Hamlet, read David Ball. It's the best analysis of the play that I've ever read. Changes his mind, changes probably your mind, everybody's mind on everything that's ever been written about Hamlet. After you read Backwards and Forwards, you're like, oh, no, duh. Anyway, so I've come up with this stupid little scenario which we can use to apply David Ball's concepts. So here's the story. So pretend that this is a play. I run into your room and say the house is on fire, and then you jump out of a window. That is an action. According to David Ball, this is an event, me running into your room, and this is also an event, so the two of those things together is called an action. I think he puts it this way, or I think definitely his way of putting these two things together really highlights the ricochet effect, the domino effect, how one thing causes another thing to happen. Just for the purposes of me probably not having to come back to this slide again, so let's just take as our example this little playlet. I run into your room and say the house is on fire. Because I do that, you jump out of the window. Because since you're out of the window, since you're gone, I steal your stamp collection, which might have been my intention the whole time, of coming in the room and telling you it's on fire. I go down to the pawn shop and they pay me $1,000. I go buy a magic lamp and it has a genie in it. I ask the genie for ultimate peace, and then the genie kills me. Okay, so that's the little story that we're going to use as our example for this David Ball analysis. So actions are two things. Two events make an action. Action is primary. When you begin analyzing a play, no matter who you are, I didn't throw in designer earlier, either in the list of people who do theater. Obviously they are, and it is really important for designers to analyze plays too. Always begin a script analysis that says with this, that you probably can't see because of my head rearing itself. The first thing I do when I am going to direct a play is, and maybe even as an actor too, I make a list of all the events, everything that happens. That's the beginning of script analysis. I totally agree. I'm not just telling you, hey, this is what Ball thinks. I'm telling you that's the way it is. You always do that. Analysis begins with defining what happens that makes something else happen. That's his sort of intro to what makes a play a play. Two kind of interesting terms that he uses that I think are pretty helpful. Trigger and a heap. Think of shooting somebody, although I really hate guns, but this is an image that we'll kind of stick with. You pull the trigger, and what happens? There's a heap. There's a body lying on the floor. For each action's first event, which is the trigger, it creates a second event, which is the heap. So according to Ball, you need a trigger and a heap to make an action. So just reinforcing the idea that one thing happens, makes another thing happen, and that's an action, and that's what plays are all about. But then the heap becomes a trigger leading to a new heap, and therefore a new action. So in a play, these things happen and they keep building upon each other in a very classic way. Now let me take a moment. This is not something Ball talks about, and this is not something I put in a slide, but let me take a little tangent to emphasize that this type of script analysis can be done for any play, no matter how whacked out, no matter if it's an absurdist play, if it's a postmodern play, if it's an episodic play, if it's whatever. If the story is told in reverse, if the story is told in, 100-year increments and jumps back and forth, whatever, you can always put together the story in terms of these events. Now, if you're not going to tell a play in a linear chronological way, which is, clearly laying out this happened, this happened, this happened. If you're going to ask the audience to put those pieces together and remember what happened in scene 1, which is 100 years ago, and what happened in scene 2, which is in the future, then that has to be something you have to be very aware of. You're asking the audience to do that. And that there may be a very good reason to do that. There's all kinds of ways to tell a story. But at the end of the day, we're always going to be trying to string it together in a chronological way and make it make sense. And the way that plays make sense is event, action. Action becomes a new event, becomes another event, add to that, you get a new action. So you're adding these things up all the way. The heap becomes a trigger leading to a new heap and therefore a new action. Think of it like dominoes. You set up your dominoes, one falls and hits the other, and brrr, down the line. Something that David Ball points out is that one domino can only knock over the domino that's right next to it. So remember that the purpose of this book is play analysis, primarily for theater practitioners. So when you're a director, when you're an actor, when you're a designer, you make sure that your triggers and heaps are contiguous. You know, that one is only work. How does this event affect this specific event? And that's kind of the point of his whole book in a weird sort of way. Sequential analysis of action is the key to understanding the play, not understanding my head. Now, here's David Ball's biggest bang for his buck. This is where he is the most innovative, this is his big idea. In order to really analyze a play, you have to look at it backwards. Now, this may seem like just a gimmick, but if you really think about it, it makes just a ton of sense. Analyzing plays backwards is the best way to discover why events happen. What was really required for an action to happen. Let's just look at all this text that's up here. When something happens, many other things could happen as a result. The only way that you can really come up with a solid analysis on why these things happen is if you look at it backwards. And this will make more sense when we look back at our example. Only by looking at actions backwards can you know exactly how they were cause to effect. You can't predict what will happen next, but you can know why something happens if you look backwards. So those are his main points. Those are that's sort of the point. So let's think about this. One of the ideas that he throws out there in the book is when something happens, there are thousands of other possibilities. I run into your room and I say that the house is on fire. The next thing that happens is you jump out the window. Well, if I run into your room and say the house is on fire, many things could happen from that. You could grab your stamp collection and run out the door. You could grab your stamp collection and jump out the window. You can do many things. But if you look at this backwards, you jumping out the window, the only direct cause to effect relationship we can understand or define is when we look at it backwards. Because that's the only way. You jumping out the window, the only thing that could have caused that would be me coming in and saying the house is on fire. Because that's the story. As we are audience members sitting in the theater, me running in there, 100 billion things are possible. So looking at the whole thing backwards, the genie kills me, which is, I guess, will be sort of the climax. Why? Because I asked for ultimate peace, and the genie said you only get that in death, and so zing, I'm dead. I asked for ultimate peace. Why? Because I bought a genie. I bought a lamp with a genie. Many other things could have happened to make me ask for ultimate peace. I could have been whatever. Or if you look at the other way, I buy a magic lamp and the genie is in it. Good heavens, what all could have happened? I could have asked for a billion trillion different things. So I hope I'm making this clear. It's really, I think it's a really ingenious way to think about analyzing events by looking at them backwards. And obviously, this is just a down and dirty quick video. He explains it very well in his book, which is a pretty short read. Now, here's that's sort of that's the big point of David Ball's book. Here is, and then the other half of the book are just some basic nuts and bolts thing, laid out in a very simple way, extremely short chapters. He talks about stasis, which I've talked about in my script analysis lecture. I do want to point out, a student in a class one time was confused about what does stasis mean, and they looked up the definition, and stasis means not moving, which means stationary. Maybe it means sort of a lack of action. In a play, it means much more than that. It does mean lack of action because it takes an intrusion for the forces to change, but the stasis of the play is that there is a balance. Balance is a good way to, a good sort of synonym for stasis. It's motionless, standing still, unchanging. All the forces are in balance. And then the intrusion happens, which I may have pointed out before, but if not, I'll try to make it very clear here. Intrusion and inciting incident are the same thing. It's the event, and again, something happens. Ball would probably say it's the action. It would be little two events that make an action. but something happens that changes the forces of, of conflict in the play. And as we know, plays are all about conflict. If there's no conflict, there is no play. The stasis returns at the end of the play when the forces either get what they want or they are forced to stop trying. So at the end of every play, there's a new stasis, there's a new balance, there's a new situation. This gets tricky when we analyze some movies which are leading to sequels, and at the end you always get that which that's going to be the next Avengers movie or whatever. But at the end of looking at it simply, at the end, the forces either got what they want or they were forced to stop trying. This is the most important slide in this lecture for playwrights. All dialogue must be motivated. Tattoo this on your forearm and stare at it when you read a play, when you're writing a play. Just as it is in real life, always, 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 really, all dialogue must be motivated. And the motivation cannot be your need to give the audience information. Hi, Bill. How are you? My dear brother, who was born 3 years before me. You would never, we don't say that. Ball goes really quickly into analyzing the only reason we even learn how to talk is because we want something. Babies learn to say mama because they know that when I say mama, it means I'm going to get fed or changed or what have you. So every word, every syllable, there must be a character need to say that. If not, cut it. If you're reading this, listening to this as a playwright, you will be very surprised at how little language you need, how much we actually get without you putting in all that audience information. The only reason we talk is because we want something. Every want in a play requires an obstacle. Another thing to keep in mind. There's no point in putting a goal for a character if there's no obstacle against getting it. There's no conflict, and therefore it's not a play. All exposition should be essential. Really, really think about what do you have to tell us, and then probably cut that in half. Really. If you are not a playwright, if you're just reading plays and trying to understand them, then you should assume, especially if it's a play that somebody has assigned to read in a class, it's probably a good play. So therefore, all the exposition is there for a reason. It's your job to understand what is the reason. As an audience member reading a play, as a student reading a play, as a director, especially as a director. If you are the director and you don't know why every single syllable is in the play, then you need to do your homework. Assume that, this is kind of what I'm saying right now, assume that all of the exposition is essential and it's your job to figure out why it's there. Now, theatricality is something that is really important to talk about, to think about. Look what I can do. Floating head moves. The term theatrical is really tricky. We talk about it a lot in terms of the difference between plays and movies, what makes theater theater, blah, 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 blah. Once upon a time, I might have said, well, if it's theatrical, it's using the elements of the theater. It's using design. It's using the lighting. It's using the fill in the blank. Well, Ball thinks that theatricality is simply anything that causes a strong audience response. And I really like that. I think it's an excellent way to look at it. Anything that causes a strong audience response. Dynamic, and here's the little list, by no means complete. Suspense, fun moments, important moments, deep feelings, they're all very theatrical. It doesn't just have to be, scene changes. It doesn't have to be the design elements, the plastic elements. It's anything that's important. He argues that it's the theater's job to keep people in the theater, make sure they come back after intermission. All those little things that keep it interesting, he would consider those theatrical. Conflict is extremely important for anything to be theatrical. So we as play readers and you as a writer would want to keep in mind that a good play has its most important material in the most theatrical moments. In the boom, boom, boom climax, we find out, oh, you're really my mother, or, whatever. Those important bits of exposition often leak out in extremely theatrical ways. We should want to write that way. It's just keeps audiences involved. It doesn't make it cheap or gimmicky. It's the way it works. So we, as people who analyze plays, we need to find the theatrical moments, and then you find out what the playwright thinks is most important. He has a whole chapter on something called forewords, which is, we might consider that foreshadowing. It's a little bit different, but for the purposes of trying to save some time, I won't go into it very much. But it keeps us asking, oh, what's going to come next? Keeps us engaged, and keeps us sort of linked into what's important. Character. He makes some really cool observations about character. Character is revealed by what they do to overcome their obstacle and to get what they want. Be very suspicious of what characters say and especially what other characters say about them, because remember, everything is motivated. All dialogue is motivated for a reason. So just because they say something doesn't mean it's true, and doesn't mean it really tells you who they are. As in life, what people do is far more important than what people say. This is a really interesting idea, and he's not the only one who has brought this idea up, but it's true and it's interesting, because most of us think about characters. Who's the lead character? Oh, who's the one who goes through the biggest change? He argues that characters really don't change, but their circumstances do. That's why they seem to change. Since I remembered about this sort of concept a few years ago, I've really started thinking about it a lot, and I really do agree. So that might be an interesting thing for you to think about if you're playing a character. At the end of the play, have they really changed, or is it just the circumstances that have changed? Character is drama's most subjective element, because every time we see it, plays are written to be performed. Every time we see it, it's going to be filtered through a different actor. So audience's perception really depends on the actor. That's why reading plays can be really interesting, but there's nothing like seeing it too. If something that you always must pay attention to when you're analyzing a play is the title. It's something so easy to forget, but think about it. The title of Trifles says a lot. The title Oedipus Rex. If you know what Rex means, that means a lot. Used to be Oedipus Tyrannus, which was a tyrant, was somebody very different from a king. Tyrant was somebody who took over power. So in the name of Oedipus Rex is actually Oedipus Tyrannus, or however you say the Greek. So pay attention to titles. And repeated images. If an image comes up more than once, it means something. Pay attention to it. Very lastly, look for theme and atmosphere. If these things happen if you start putting too much importance to these things too early, it can skew your interpretation of the play. Theme and atmosphere, always look for them last. Only look for them after you thoroughly know the events of the play and what happens. That's got to be primary. So talking about, the mood or the atmosphere or the theme or the sort of all these intellectual academic things are a complete waste of time unless you know what happens. When you're researching a play, this is sort of just spitballing list of cool things that he throws out there as we get close to winding this little lecture up. When you're doing research about a play, which is always useful, he does emphasize that research is very important no matter who you are. Something that we don't always think about, which maybe we do sometimes, reading the playwright's other works are really important too. So don't negate that. That's a very good idea. Family relationships are frequently at the center of every single play, so think about that. He drives us home when he talks about Hamlet. We might say Hamlet is about kings and queens, blah, 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 but it's really about a guy who's angry at his mother, and his uncle murdered his father, so that it's all about family, usually, a lot of times. The unique factor might be something I've mentioned before, but think about why today. Why did this happen right now? It makes the action of the play very specific in time. I could talk about that forever, but just because I'm not going to talk about it for a long time, it's actually one of the most important things to think about when writing a play. Why do these characters do this today as opposed to yesterday, as opposed to tomorrow, or what have you? Just a little thing for directors, and if you're seeing a play and the time period has been changed, you should always consider what the original audience would have thought about the world of the play. Again, he brings up the example of Hamlet, set in Denmark. Well, to Shakespeare's audiences, Denmark was this mysterious, weird, sort of bohemian in the original word definition of that word, scary, backwards sort of place. And that's how the audience saw it. So if you were to set it, if you wanted to change the setting, then maybe you'd want to set it in a place where your audience has a similar concept of what the original audience would have had. Just food for thought. Almost finished here. Plays are meant to be read aloud. As a director, as a whoever you are, even as an audience member, or if you're an intro just reading a play, if you're an actor reading a play, even though you're not going to work on it, try reading it aloud. Always, always do this if you're in a show or working on a show. Always read it aloud before rehearsal begins. It gives you a lot of really great insight. When I'm working on new plays and I have the privilege of having the playwright there, in the first rehearsal, if possible, if I can make it happen in any way, shape, or form, I make the playwright read the entire play out loud. It gives me the quickest shorthand way to learn about the rhythm of the play. And most playwrights are former actors anyway, so they kind of like doing it. So that's all. That is David Ball. I cannot suggest this book. It has been one of the most important books in my education. If you want a copy of it, let me know. I can let you borrow mine. It's cheap and it's available everywhere. So that is David Ball, Backwards and Forwards, one of the most awesomest books that you will find in the theater. All right. Have a good day.